a comment or a chat in there, and we will go ahead and get started.
Should I go ahead and say a little good morning from the Senior Center at this time? All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. It's good to see some of your faces. I'm with the Tallahassee Senior Center. I'm the Health and Wellness Program Coordinator, and with the wonderful team at TMH and also the UF Extension Center, we've put together yet another series on nutrition. People have so much interest in how to eat well for a better quality of life. So I really appreciate how wonderful they have been to work with. So thank you all for being here. And remember, this is a 3-part series, so attend all or some as you desire. The link that I sent to you today will work for all 3 meetings. So you won't get a link from me every week, okay? Everybody can save it. Okay. You can always email if you need it again, though.
All right. Well, thank you, Ruth. And good morning, everyone. Good morning, all you little black squares out there. I know that you're there listening to me, and thank you for being muted so we can get through the presentation and you'll be able to hear me and some of the other speakers today. We are so pleased to partner with the Senior Center and have this talk this morning on the 2021 nutrition goals, really related to the dietary guidelines. Let me also remind Ruth, if you haven't started already, to record the presentation, because I know you were asking about that. So we can go ahead and get started. My name is Dawn Springs, and I am here at my office at the Tallahassee Memorial Metabolic Health Center. And I am one of the presenters today for our conversation about the nutrition guidelines that were recently released. And I have some other presenters as well. I'm going to start sharing my screen now so you guys can see our presentation. All right. Hopefully everybody can see that. And if you can't, you can, Anna or somebody can just let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and get started and introduce our team and panelists this morning. This is all of our nice pictures, our nice colorful pictures. So you can see a little bit about what we look like, and you'll see us on Zoom as well. This is the team that has been working on this nutrition series for April. We have a series of three talks, the dietary guidelines talk that we're talking about today, one called Just the Facts, Food Labels and Healthy Drink Choices that will be next week, next Wednesday, same time, same place. And then the following Wednesday from that, on April 21st, we have one called Focus on Fruits and Vegetables, and that will be the 3rd of our 3-part series this month. So the team here, I'm in the middle on the top, and on the upper left side is Afaf Kasem. She is the TMH Director of Quality of Life Services, and she's been involved in helping prepare this presentation today. Jane Watts, she's in the upper right-hand corner. She's also going to be speaking. She's a Florida State dietetic intern, as well as a master's student at Florida State. In the lower left-hand corner is Amy Mullins. She is with the University of Florida IFAS Extension Office and is a family consumer science agent there. And Anna Brooks, who helped introduce and kick off our presentation. She is also with University of Florida IFAS Extension Office and is a nutrition educator for the Family Nutrition Program. All right, so that's who we are. All right, today, so what we're going to be talking about, just an overview or the highlights of today. And I always think this slide makes me hungry with all this appetizing food on here. We're going to talk about the dietary guidelines, what's new for 2020 to 2025 version guidelines for older adulthood, the specific nutrients of concerns for older adults, what is food insecurity and resources that are available for additional foods, and physical activity recommendations. So that's kind of a preview of things to come. But for now, before we get started too much with the content, I want to ask Anna if she could do a little poll for us to get a little bit of feedback before we get started. So Anna, do I need to stop sharing my screen to do that?
No, you're good. I'm going to go ahead and launch it right now. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen. It's going to be 2 questions, and it's just kind of gauging what we know about some of the content that we're going to cover later in the presentation.
So there's 2 questions on here. So if you guys could take a minute to kind of read through them and answer what you think is the right answers or just what you think, that's all fine.
We have some results coming in. So once we have a good majority of people responded, I'll go ahead and I'll end the poll and I can share the results. We can see kind of what the most popular answers were. All right, we're at 71%. So or 75. So if anybody else would like to submit a guess, feel free. I'm probably going to close the poll in about 30 seconds. Wonderful. We got to 78%. So I'm going to end the poll here and then I can share the results.
Well, this is good information to have. And we will be covering the guidelines and answers to these polling questions as we go through the presentation this morning. So thank you for your feedback. It's always good to see what other people are thinking and what they've heard about before we get too far into our content today. So thank you so much for responding to the nutrient question. Definitely going to talk about nutrients today. As well as the lifestyle changes. We're going to talk about a bunch of those as well. So thank you, Anna. All right. So back to our journey here on the guidelines. Okay. So this is the logo for the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. That's the DGA up at the top of the screen. The USDA and the Health and Human Services organizations update the guidelines at least every 5 years based on current science. The guidelines evolve as far as scientific knowledge of nutrition and health outcomes go. So it's a process, and the guidelines and recommendations that many things are based off of need to be updated. There's a fundamental premise to these guidelines in that everyone can benefit from shifting food and drink choices to support a healthier dietary pattern. And we're going to talk about those patterns in a little bit here. So that's that slide. All right, I put this graphic up. It may be kind of tiny depending on the screen that you're looking at there, but the USDA and Health and Human Services have some graphics about their process. I thought it was interesting to review the history of the guidelines, which have been around a few decades now. The whole process is mandated by Congress, and the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee meets and examines the science and public comments as well throughout this process. The guideline committee is not part of the federal government. It's a separate external resource group of scientists and nutrition professionals that look at the data and make their recommendations based on a whole body of evidence there. And then the USDA and the Health and Human Services write the dietary guidelines based on the report from the Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee. This is reviewed by scientific experts after they write it, and then it goes for final clearance with the USDA. And so this is this is cleared by them, and then it's published. And these actually just got published in December for 2020 to 2025. That's the 5-year rotation there. So that's kind of some of how that bill becomes a law, so to speak. All right, some changes from the previous set of guidelines, and these I think came out a little while ago, but there are 3 important ways that these are different. The first is a recognition that diet-related chronic disease is very prevalent. Today, more than half of adults have one or more chronic conditions, which may not surprise you. Definitely where I work as healthcare, we see that all the time here. In fact, where I work is at the Metabolic Health Center with the hospital, and we have several specialists in chronic condition kind of experts, and some of our services have a long waiting list of people to get in because there are so many people with chronic conditions in our community. So we've definitely seen here a real increase over the past 10 or 15 years with people with multiple chronic conditions. And since there's a nutrition component to many of those, therefore the new guidelines reflect trying to address some of these in treatment or in prevention. Secondly, the second important way is there's a focus on dietary patterns. Nutrients are encountered in foods and in various combinations over time. So food and drinks together affect your health. And this edition of the Dietary Guidelines really emphasizes the importance of the whole dietary pattern rather than individual nutrients in foods or having food groups in isolation. So really looking at the bigger picture of what we eat or drink. And we're going to talk about the nutrients too, because some are of specific importance in certain age groups. So we're definitely going to focus a little bit more on that so everyone has more knowledge of foods and food groups that may be more important to them. The third important reason that the new guidelines emphasize some things differently is there's an emphasis on the lifespan approach and the importance of healthy eating from infancy through older adulthood. So covering a lot of territory there. All right, so on this slide is the 4 overarching guidelines. There's like 4 main guidelines with some different key recommendations in each one. The first one is to follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage, from infancy through adulthood and senior adults. Then secondly, another guideline is to customize and enjoy nutrient-dense food and drink choices to reflect personal preferences, cultural traditions, and budgetary considerations. The third is meeting food groups with nutrient-dense choices and being aware of calorie limits. And then the fourth is to limit foods and beverages higher in added sugars, saturated fats, sodium, and alcohol. And some of these we're going to talk more specifically about today, and also in the follow-up nutrition series, we're going to give some more practical help with how to meet these guidelines. All right, so here is guideline number 1. Guideline number 1 is following a healthy dietary pattern. It's never too late or too early to eat healthfully. This is the first edition to promote the guidance for every lifestyle stages, as I was talking about earlier. Dietary patterns are what we eat and drink regularly over time. This may predict our health status and disease risk years later. The guidelines focus on encouraging nutrient-dense foods and drinks, and the USDA dietary patterns provide the framework to show elements of healthy dietary patterns without specifically saying which foods to eat, like how much and which of everything, and be very prescriptive. It's more a framework or the outline of different patterns. Some examples of dietary patterns are listed at the bottom of the slide. There's the healthy US style dietary pattern, and I'm going to show another slide on that in a second. Another one that you may have heard of is a Mediterranean style dietary pattern, and another example is the vegetarian dietary patterns. There's this whole concept of dietary patterns is really about the framework and looking at the trends of what you eat and not necessarily specifically any one particular choice. So let's go. Here's another busy graphic, and I apologize if you're looking at this on a very small device, because I know it's kind of busy, but I just wanted to give an example of the healthy US style dietary pattern for adults ages 60 and older. So this is across the top, you'll see the calorie levels, and that's just kind of how this framework is divided up, with portions of food groups for daily intake or weekly intake, depending on the total amount of calories that someone would be trying to achieve or not go over necessarily during the day. So there's the vegetable groups, there's fruits and grains, dairies and protein and oils. Those are kind of highlighted. Those are the highlighted ones are the daily servings for each of those that would add up to be that calorie level. And then underneath are sort of specific weekly amounts of different kinds of vegetables and fruits and grains, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of gives a weekly goal. Again, because we're looking at the bigger picture, but then if you wanted to break that down into what would that average out to be per day, those are kind of in the main highlighted areas there. I think that one of the interesting things that I saw about this was looking at all the different kinds of vegetables that would meet the daily requirement, as well as looking at the different kinds of grains. So a lot of things fall into this category, and of course there are more or less healthy choices in each of the groups. But this is just an example of one type of framework. Mediterranean style has a little bit different amounts of some of these foods, as well as the vegetarian one. All right, and to go into a little bit more depth on guideline number 2, customize and enjoy nutrient-dense food according to preferences, cultural traditions, and budget. A healthy dietary pattern can benefit all individuals, regardless of race, age, ethnicity, or current health status. The dietary guidelines provide this framework, which is intended to be customized to individual needs and preferences, as well as foodways of diverse cultures in the US. And the details of the dietary guidelines document, which is massive, like a couple hundred pages, they do give some different examples of food groups and all the different foods that fit into these different types of food groupings now. For example, I looked up the dark green vegetables, which was on the previous slide as one of the categories for vegetable servings. And here are the listings just for the dark green vegetables and the dietary guidelines. They can be broccoli, bok choy, collards, kale, mustard greens, amaranth leaves, watercress, romaine lettuce, spinach, taro leaves, and that's just their beginning list of the dark green vegetables. So a lot of different foods can fit into these food groups, and I think it's good that they try to address the diversity of all of us eating different ways and eating different foods than we may have seen printed in this publication before. All right. Here's another graph, a little bigger than last time. And this is a graph when I said that we could all benefit from improving our choices and overall daily dietary patterns. Here's the reason why. This graph shows the age group, this one in particular is the 60 and older group, and how we're doing on what the recommendation is versus what we're actually doing. And I will just tell you that all the other age groups were worse. So this is as good as it gets. This is how we're doing for the average intake of men and women, and pretty much grains and protein foods. I'm sure this probably isn't surprising to most of you. We're doing okay. This does not say whether they're healthy grains or healthy protein choices, just how many servings total of these types of foods are we having every day as a society, as an age group, and then what is the recommendation? So we're pretty much under in all the rest of the fruits and the vegetables and the dairy. And yeah, so we have lots of room for improvement, but that probably is more typical of what we see from day to day for many Americans. And so we have lots that we can look at for individual choices and things that we can do to improve our overall dietary pattern. So that's my beginning intro into dietary guidelines, this framework of dietary patterns. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jane to talk a little bit more about the other specific guidelines.
Okay, hi. Thanks, Dawn. So I'm going to talk about guideline 3, And guideline 3 is just kind of focusing on meeting the food groups with those nutrient dense foods. So as Dawn mentioned, the US citizens as a whole are very low in vegetables, fruits, and dairy. We aren't really meeting those recommendations, but we are meeting those recommendations in protein and grains typically, but they tend to be in that more refined grain category and more so like processed meats. So those fattier cuts of meats. Can you go back? Okay, so we're lacking those nutrient dense options like those whole wheats, whole grains, seafoods, and again, all those fruits and vegetables. And as Dawn mentioned, there are some different subgroups of vegetables, like the dark green vegetables, and she listed off several options for those. There are red and orange vegetables, which are your like bell peppers, and carrots are going to fall in that category, as well as beans, peas, and lentils, starchy vegetables, and another category. And then those protein groups, there's 3 different groups of those. And those are going to be your meats, poultry, eggs, seafood, and nuts, seeds, and soy products. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so we've kind of mentioned nutrient dense a bunch so far. So what is a nutrient dense food and beverage? These food and beverages are going to provide vitamins, minerals, and other healthy promoting components. They have little added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium. And we are going to talk about those a little bit more further in the presentation to kind of give you an idea of why we should limit those. But this is just kind of this graphic kind of explains a nutrient dense option versus a typical kind of what's seen in our American diet. So first we have the plain shredded wheat versus the frosted shredded wheat. The biggest difference there is just going to be that they took that frosting off, so it's going to limit those added sugars. The next one is that plain low fat yogurt with fruit. So it's going to be lower in saturated fat as well as lower in added sugars versus that other full fat yogurt with added sugars. And then that next one is the low sodium black beans. So any kind of canned product, you can look for a low sodium, no salt added, or reduced sodium on the can. Those are going to show you that those canned options have a lower sodium content. And then the next one is that vegetable oil versus butter. Butter is going to have it's going to be higher in saturated fat versus that oil, which is why it's a little bit better to cook with that vegetable oil versus a butter option. And then that last one is sparkling water versus soda. If you really just love that carbonation, you can do sparkling water. That's going to limit that added sugar, where soda is going to have a lot of added sugar to it. Go to the next one. All right. So as Dawn mentioned, there are several nutrients that are of concern for older adults, just because we may start to not absorb them as well, and just they become a little bit more important as we age. So those are protein, vitamin B12, calcium and vitamin D, and then fluid. You can go to the next one. Okay, so protein. Having an adequate protein intake is extremely important for preventing the loss of lean muscle mass. So as we age, our body's hormones naturally change, which can alter how much muscle mass we have. So it's important to eat the right amounts so we don't lose more than we naturally would. And if you are concerned with getting more protein, you can start looking at the food label. So at first, reading the food labels can kind of be confusing and time consuming, but once you kind of get used to it, it's a really good tool to have. So you can kind of see here on the side, I have the arrow pointed to protein. So that's going to be where you can find how much protein per serving is in your food selection. And then the good sources of protein are going to be those seafood, meats, poultry and eggs, nuts, seeds, and soy products, beans, peas, and lentils, and then dairy and fortified soy products. Go to the next one. Okay, vitamin B12. So what is it? It's a nutrient that helps keep our body's nerve and blood cells healthy. And as we age, our bodies absorb B12 less. Medications can also interfere with the absorption of B12 as well. But B12 is one of the nutrients that we don't find on the food label, but it is a component of a lot of protein foods. So if you're meeting the needs for your protein, you should be meeting your needs for vitamin B12. And then some of those protein foods that are a common source of B12 are beef, liver, and chicken, clams, trout, salmon, and tuna fish. And then we have eggs. And then there are some breakfast cereals that are fortified with vitamin B12. And fortified just means that it has been added to that product that it naturally wouldn't be found in. This just helps us meet those needs a little bit easier. You can go to the next one. Okay, so calcium. So what is it? It's a mineral that is important for our bone health and muscle function. And again, our ability to absorb decreases about 15 to 20% with adulthood. Again, on that food label, if you want to start kind of monitoring how much your intake or just seeing if it is in the products you're buying, you can find it on the food label, and it's going to be underneath that second bolded black line, just under vitamin D, as you can see here where I have pointed to it. And then some good sources are going to be your dairy products mainly, yogurt, milk, cheese. We also have soy milks, sardines and canned salmon are also good sources. And then we have orange juice that's calcium fortified, so it has it added to it. And if you are lactose intolerant or just don't like those dairy products, there are lots of different ways to get calcium in your diet. So there are lots of foods fortified with it, like those orange juices. Cereals are also fortified with it. And then we have lots of dairy alternative products like those soy milks, rice milks, almond milks, and so on. Go to the next one. All right, so vitamin D. So what is it? It is a fat-soluble vitamin that aids in the absorption of calcium. So really important to get both of vitamin D and calcium because they kind of work together. It strengthens the immune response and healing. And again, if you're wanting to kind of look to see if your products you're buying have it on that food label, you can check. It's underneath that second bolded black line as well, just above calcium, as you can see pointed there. And then some really good sources. So sunlight exposure is going to be our best source of vitamin D, but there are some really good food options as well. Cod liver oil, salmon, mushrooms have vitamin D, and then that fortified orange juice and dairy products again also have vitamin D as well. I think that is all I am going to talk to you guys about, so I will pass it off to Amy now, and she'll talk a little bit more about the other things.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much, Jane. Yeah, so moving into the fluid recommendations. So did you know that high dehydration is the leading cause of hospitalizations and serious health problems for older adults? A lot of people don't realize that, but it actually is. By the time you feel thirsty, the essential fluid levels in your body may have already dropped too low. And the sensation of thirst tends to decline as we grow older. Excuse me. That's why it's really important to stay ahead and drink plenty of water to prevent this dehydration. Water also aids in digestion of food and the absorption of nutrients. And so the recommendations for fluid, we're going to talk about that for a moment. You can see here on the slide. It's about 125 ounces for men and 91 ounces for women. That's roughly 5 to 6 20-ounce water bottles. Hopefully we're not all drinking water bottles. Still some sustainability issues going on there, but just to kind of give you an idea, that's how much that would be. But also water and fluids, you're going to find that in fruits and veggies and soups and things like that. That will also contribute to that total overall fluid intake. Some produce that's really high in water, things like cucumbers and celery, lettuce, melons. This summer we're going to have watermelons and honeydew and cantaloupe and all those things, citrus and berries. Those are all really high in water, about 90%. It's also important to focus on unsweetened beverages and to limit things that have a lot of additional sugar in them. However, if you're outside exercising, you're doing a lot of yard work or gardening for an extended period of time, it can be important to replace those lost electrolytes and sodium. And so having something like a sports drink can be really beneficial. And so, we want to make sure that we take care of ourselves, especially in the heat in Florida, because of heat illness and the dangers that it presents. Next slide. So some signs of dehydration, some of these you might recognize if you've ever had any dehydration or heat stroke or heat illness. Things like headache, your urine color, constipation, muscle cramps, dry mouth, sleepiness, fatigue, and nausea, and vomiting. These are all very serious indicators that you're underhydrated, and you need to get inside, get some cool air, sit down, rest, get some fluids in you. All right, next slide. So how do you know if you're hydrated enough? So we just talked about dehydration, but how do you know if you're hydrated? So one way to know is one that maybe we're all familiar with. I love this P chart. It's what we call it, but basically the color of your urine, right? So this chart looks at how to tell to see if you need to drink more water. So basically the darker your urine, the more concentrated it is, right? And the more water that you need to consume. So it's really important to pay attention to your body giving you those signals that you need to increase your water intake. Okay, next slide. Excuse me. Okay, so moving into guideline 4, which is the added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium, and limiting alcoholic beverages. They really put a lot of stuff in guideline 4. So let's talk kind of through a little bit of this here. Excess intake of added sugars, saturated in fats, and sodium can lead to an increased risk of developing chronic diseases. So specifically ones that are associated with cardiovascular disease and excess body weight. So the 85-15 plan is kind of a good rule of thumb to help keep excess fat and sugar in check. And basically, it means that 85% of calories that we require every day, we get that from the food group recommendations already. So that leaves us an additional 15% of calories that are available for like discretionary foods. So that kind of comes out to only about 250 to 350 calories. There really isn't that much in the way of discretionary food. So it's extra important that we pay attention, read labels, and see where those extra calories are coming from. Next slide. So first of all, we'll tackle added sugars. So added sugar is basically, it's a sugar that is unnatural to the food product and that they're adding it in there extra, right? It's typically found in sweetened beverages, desserts, sweet snacks. You're also going to find it in things like bread and all kinds of places you never would expect to find it. So it's recommended that we take in only about 10% or less of our calories from added sugars daily, and it really isn't much. For women, that's no more than 100 calories per day from sugar, or about 6 teaspoons. And for men, it's no more than 150 calories per day, which is about 9 teaspoons of sugar. So as you can see here on the food label, added sugars have been included now. That wasn't always there. And you can also check the ingredient list and look for words like dextrose, lactose, brown sugar, malt syrup, maltose, corn syrup, molasses, fructose, honey, raw sugar. There's a whole bunch of different words that mean sugar on the label. You may also notice on packaging, on claims for packaging, so it may be on the front of the package or whatever, where it says something like it's sugar-free or reduced sugar or no sugar added. So sugar-free means that it's got less than half a gram of sugar per serving. Reduced sugar is 25% less sugar per serving than the regular version of the product. And no sugar added means that they didn't add any extra sugar or sugar containing ingredients during processing. So those are some helpful things you can look for on the label if you're not so much into reading the actual nutrition facts label. Okay, next slide. All right, sodium, moving on to sodium. Sodium is essential. It is an essential nutrient that we commonly use in cooking to add flavor. But too much sodium can have a negative effect, especially on blood pressure, and can lead to or worsen hypertension. It's true that it's about 1 in 3 people have hypertension, and that just blows my mind. That's a lot of people. They actually call it the silent killer because so many people don't realize that they have high blood pressure, and it can cause a whole lot of damage. So the recommendation is that we consume less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. Unfortunately, many processed foods have a massive amount of sodium in them, so it's really important that you pay attention on the food label to see what you're getting. Some high sodium foods include things like canned soups, which have 800 to 1,000 milligrams per cup. A hot dog has about 600 milligrams of sodium. Potato chips, about 1,200 milligrams for like a small individual 8-ounce bag. Soy sauce, if anybody likes to eat, any kind of food that's got soy sauce in it. I personally can't, it bothers me so much. I'm actually sodium sensitive, not everybody is, but I can tell when I've had something really high in sodium. 1 tablespoon of soy sauce has 880 milligrams of sodium. You can also look on the packaging as well. There are claims, is what they call them, on the outside of the packaging for things that might be low sodium. All right, that would be 140 milligrams or less in a serving. Reduced sodium is 25% less sodium than the regular product. And you may even see things that say light sodium, which is 50% less sodium than the regular food product. So, it's not perfect, but those packaging claims can be really helpful when you're trying to make a choice in the grocery store and pick the right thing. Okay, next slide. Okay, saturated fats. We often find high amounts of saturated fats in things like meat and animal products, baked goods, and cheese. So the goal is to consume less than 10% of your calories per day from saturated fat. Some of this sounds really impossible, I know, but there are some strategies you can take to try and reach that goal. So we can reduce our intake of desserts and sweet snacks. Choosing lean cuts of meat, low-fat milk, and cheeses and also cooking with canola, olive oil, or safflower oil instead of using butter. All of these things add up and can really make a difference and help reduce your saturated fat content. And if you're struggling with high cholesterol, this is maybe something your doctor's already talked to you about. These are ways that you can make a difference in your diet. Okay, next. And alcoholic beverages. Moderation is always key, especially when it comes to alcohol. The recommendations say that 2 drinks or less per day is what men should be having. So again, if you don't drink, please don't start now. But if you do, it might be a good idea to pay attention to the amount. And so 2 drinks or less per day, which is equivalent to about 2 12-ounce beers. And for women, because women are smaller, it's going to be less. It's only going to be about 1 drink a day. We put wine on here as the example because a lot of women like to drink wine. But keep in mind that's only 5 ounces. So 1 drink would be like a 12-ounce beer has as much alcohol in it as a 5-ounce glass of wine, which has as much alcohol in it as a 1-ounce shot of something that's high liquor content. Okay, so those are all equivalent amounts of alcohol. These are just some examples for you. All right, and then lastly, I just want to add a little bit about physical activity and the recommendations around that. So hopefully we're all getting some movement in every day. It's kind of hard, most recently in this Zoom world where we're not really getting out as much, but I hope that's changing and people are getting back to normal. So, it's really great to get out and do something, even if it's walking. The benefits are amazing. It can improve your cognition, your balance, your bone strength. It lowers the risk of falls and injuries from falls, and it can improve your overall ability to perform just those, normal everyday tasks. The recommendations for moderate intensity aerobic activity, these would be things like walking, swimming, Pilates or Zumba if you're in any one of those classes, or maybe you do it at home. You would want to try and get 150 to 300 minutes per week of that. So that's, like 30 minutes a day or so. And then, don't forget about those muscle strengthening activities, things like free weights or sitting up and down, body weight exercises. Maybe you have an exercise band at home that you can use. You want to do as much of those as you can. The recommendation's only at least 2 days a week. But honestly, if you can do some strength training, even sitting in your chair, and having like little 1-pound hand weights, or if you don't have those, when I would travel, I would use like a water bottle, right? You can use things like that to just kind of to do a little lifting, maybe a little stretching over the head, things like that. That all adds up and helps with your flexibility and your quality of life. And always, please don't forget, if you haven't done any of these things, you're starting something, or if you're going to ramp up your physical activity, please always check with your doctor ahead of time to make sure that it's okay, for your specific health conditions or your circumstances, that you can start some exercise regimen. And next slide. We're going to go ahead and move into wrapping up, where Anna's going to come back on with us and talk a little bit about food insecurity resources and then our next upcoming programs.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Dawn and Jane. This is some awesome information. I'm learning a lot too. So on this slide, we have some food insecurity resources. I know TMH does a lot of work with these organizations, and we wanted to put some information up here. If you are experiencing food insecurity, or you know people in your neighborhood who could benefit from being connected with some of these organizations, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us and we can definitely give you more information or connect you with the proper resources. All right, next slide. So as was mentioned, my name is Anna and I work for the Family Nutrition Program. So just a little background on our program. We serve SNAP eligible community here in Leon County, and we offer in-person and virtual nutrition education, just kind of focusing on those more practical healthy habits, making changes that can last for a long time. So if you are interested in receiving any resources, my email is on the screen, so feel free to contact me, and I will be presenting a little more at our next two presentations. If you can go to the next slide, Dawn. So these are our next two presentations. It's next Wednesday and the following Wednesday after that. It will be at 11 a.m. on this Zoom link, so you won't have to join another one. It's the same one, and we'll be discussing a little bit more about food labels. So as we mentioned with looking at nutrients and looking what nutrients can we maximize and which ones do we want to limit, and the food label really gives you all that information. So we'll be discussing that in terms of drink choices. And then at our last presentation, we'll be discussing fruits and vegetables. So I noticed some questions in the chat about fruits and vegetables, and we are going to address those today, but I also wanted to mention that at our final presentation, I will go into more depth about fresh, frozen, and canned, and we'll kind of discuss produce options and how you can weigh the pros and cons of those to find ways to eat fruits and vegetables that works for your schedule. So I think we're ready to move into questions. I know there were at least 3 in the chat towards the end there.
Do you want to put the polling question up before we do
yes.
Q&A?
Yes, thank you. I forgot about that. So we have one last poll. It's going to be, the first question is the same as the initial poll, just to kind of see what we've learned. And then the second question is a little bit more about application of the presentation. So let me launch this conclusion poll. So the final question on the poll about lifestyle changes, if there's anything that's not mentioned in those options, if you want to type in the chat and let us know something that you took away from this presentation or something you're planning to implement, feel free to utilize that function. We're at about 50% voted, so I'm going to give it just a little bit more time to see if we have anybody else who would like to respond. All right, about 15 more seconds. Perfect, we reached 75, so I'm going to end the polling here. And I will share the results so we can all see. So definitely the nutrients of concern that we talked about today, we're going to be vitamin D and calcium, vitamin B12, and protein. So those were the ones that we highlighted today. Obviously, iron and vitamin C are also very important for your health, but in terms of the ones that we discussed today, those were the 3. And then I see a lot of responses for drinking hydrating fluids, which is awesome. That's definitely something that we were hoping would stick. So, and we'll discuss that more at our next presentation too, when we talk about food labels and drinking healthy beverages. All right, so I think we're ready now to move into questions. I will start with, I think Louise had the first question. she said, does rinsing canned veggies reduce salt? So I'm not sure, Jane, Amy, or Dawn, who wants to jump in to comment on this one.
Yeah, so I don't mind answering that. Right, so canned vegetables do have sodium in them. You can buy some that are lower sodium. But putting them in a colander and rinsing it off, getting some of that liquid out of there will help remove some of the sodium. That's a great question. Absolutely, that's one of the things you can do.
Awesome. All right, and we had another question. Do you think frozen vegetables are better than canned vegetables? I can take this one if nobody else would like. Okay, we are gonna oh, Dawn, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, go for it, Anna.
Oh, okay, we are gonna discuss this at our final Zoom when we talk about focusing on fruits and vegetables and fresh, frozen, canned. But no, there is not a nutritional difference between a frozen vegetable and a canned vegetable. However, a lot of times, as we highlighted today with canned vegetables, there might be added sodium, and maybe even if you're talking about frozen fruits or canned fruits, sometimes they're canned in heavy syrups and things like that with added sugar. So it's really important to look at the nutrition facts label on the can to make sure that you're getting the best option that you can in terms of limiting those added sodiums and sugars. But technically there is no nutritional difference between a frozen carrot and a canned carrot. All right, our next question, is there any advantage to sea salt or pink Himalayan sea salt? I am not sure about this. Does anybody else have an answer?
I think they're probably equivalent in sodium, just somewhat different flavors, textures, so to speak. So I would say depending on how you are using it, it's more of a quantity issue versus choosing one over the other and trying to limit the amount. At least that's my experience with those two.
Thank you, Dawn. All right, and are avocado oil and coconut oil considered healthy fats?
So I guess I can take that one. Avocado oil, avocados definitely are healthy. It's a good fat. Coconut oil, I believe, and Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, that's one that it's more of a saturated fat and your body treats it that way, correct? And so it's one that doesn't really fall into the healthy oil category.
Yes, coconut oil is definitely higher in saturated fat. I know it's very popular. And one of the recommendations from the cardiovascular dietitian here is to use it as a moisturizer, but not to ingest it.
That's funny. All right, are there any additional questions? I think those are all the ones that were in the chat box, but if anybody was waiting to unmute and ask their question, feel free to do that at this time. Regina said, she commented that the only difference between Himalayan salt and normal table salt is the addition of iodine. Himalayan salt does not have iodine. I am not sure about that. Do you know, Dawn?
I know that, I don't know about the iodine content of those two. I know a lot of our salt is iodized or has iodine added to it to prevent iodine deficiency. So I guess if you were iodine deficient and not getting salt that's iodized in some other food sources, then if you had a lot of Himalayan salt, you could become iodine deficient, I guess. But that would be a pretty specific situation. I appreciate everybody taking the polling questions and answering things that they're going to do. I think the P chart made a big difference in the hydration goals of our audience today, in addition to all the other good information that we learned.
Can you put up your email again, Anna?
Yes, I threw it in the chat box. Did you see it there or?
Hold on. I gotta go back.
I have a question for the dietitians. Is this the first time that different cultural and ethnic foods have been mentioned in the guidelines?
I think that it's not the first time that it's been mentioned or addressed in some way. It's the first time I think it's been elevated to one of the major guidelines.
Great. I was so happy to see that.
Me too. I think there's a lot of discussion about making the education materials that are promoted for nutrition more diverse. And I think that this is part of that effort, is putting out guidelines that say this needs to be a priority. People eat in different ways. And so lots of foods can count and, you know, be healthier. So we need to make those part of our pictures and graphics and people eating them and explain what they are so that we can customize things to different audiences that have different food choices.
Very good, because everybody doesn't eat with like a piece of meat, a half a plate of vegetables, and you know, and a piece of bread. I mean, it's a lot more diversity out there.
That one came up like number one, Ruth, about the My Plate and trying to show people, which is a good idea in terms of showing proportions of things and, you know, eating more, you know, you can see it on the plate, but all the examples that are used are more westernized, American, you know, not very diverse. So I think that is a goal of the national groups associated with those products. And definitely we're trying to mention it in part of our presentations and teaching these days too. Though I do confess I had to look up amaranth leaves last night when I was quoting whatever the dark green vegetables were. I was like, I don't think I've eaten amaranth leaves before, but good to know.
Very good.
All right, well, it is 11:59 and we want to be respectful of your time. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you at the next 2 sessions next Wednesdays. Thank you so much to Ruth for coordinating with us to present this information, and I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thank you. You all have been wonderful. This was a very interesting presentation. Look forward to next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.